Dafnis Prieto. How are you?
I'm doing good, thank you. Yes.
Awesome. Very nice, very nice. So you've got this new album that's coming out, Transparency, in October. Before we get started, I just have a couple questions here, but is there anything you want to say about this album? Anything to let some of your fans know what's in store?
Well, I'm really excited about this album. This album actually is an invocation to transparency. Transparency in the deepest sense of the word, meaning the way you are, the way you act, the way you communicate with others, etc., etc. So it's a deeper connection to a soul. It's a deeper connection of something that I've been always, trying to maintain in my life, in my personal life and my career, to be as transparent as possible in any possible way.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah. So, I'm sure you're aware there was the Jazz Week Summit was a couple weeks ago. This is an annual meeting of broadcasters, radio personalities, people in the industry, marketing professionals, and whatever. And obviously, this year due to COVID, everything was done online. And there was a Latin jazz panel. And given the fact that this is a jazz and Latin jazz album that you're coming out with, there are some questions that were brought up at the panel that I would like to ask you and just sort of get some of your feedback on. Sound good?
Yes. Sure, please.
Awesome. Okay. So this first question during the Latin jazz panel was not necessarily a question, but more of a statement brought up by Arturo Gomez at KUVO in Denver. And his statement was that Latin jazz is less of a subgenre of jazz and more of an integral part of the idiom. Spanish tinge, Havana's influence on New Orleans, and vice versa. And his actual literal statement was, Latin jazz should be a part of any programming, same as big band, avant-garde, R&B, etc. Do you agree with this statement?
Yes, I definitely agree. I think Latin jazz has already gained a very large audience in many places, and I agree 100%. I think it has gaining also its own voice and its own way of approaching jazz. We have radio stations which have categories like smooth jazz and things like that. I don't know how, to me, I just think that radio stations should consider the fact of and the responsibility of educating people. And I think that is very important for us musicians and for the sake of maintaining different genres or subgenres or whatever that might be. So I think the listeners need to be exposed. And to be exposed, we artists depend on the media. We depend on the radio stations. We depend on the publicists. We depend on the presenters. And, it's a large combined structure that if everyone does his part, it would be very helpful, not only for Latin jazz, but for many other different genres that will be, they will help exposing the genre to the audience, and hence they will be educating the people. The only way you can educate is, first of all, by exposing them to it.
That's actually something that I wasn't really aware of. When what Arturo was what he was talking about, he's from Cuba, and he and his family, from what I understand, were able to witness some of the movement between Havana and New Orleans, and I had never really thought about that. That's not something that I was ever really exposed to, was this huge influence, especially from Cuba and the rest of the Caribbean, on New Orleans jazz, and this idea, which we'll get into in a couple of these other statements. I don't know if this is something that you maybe elaborate on, but the idea that Latin jazz is jazz and that they're one in the same, and Latin jazz is an integral part of what we understand as the American art form as jazz.
Well, there is no doubt that Cuban music, in this case, and Latin American music, has influenced the jazz idiom and musicians. You can hear even a boogaloo, which is a kind of a structure throughout the sense of a style in Cuba named cha-cha-cha. And you can see that in influence back and forth. I mean, before it was easier to experience that because we had not that much of a close boundaries in the territory when it comes to the consequence of the political situations that we're going through now. But yes, that bridge has been always there, that bridge between the U.S. and specifically with Cuba. And I think it continues. I think musicians, artists in general, are always fighting to keep that cultural exchange. And, it's very unfortunate that we always seems to be fighting against the laws that someone else who has no idea putting on us. So, we keep that fight of trying to keep that relationship between cultures and between the musicians and artists who represent that culture.
Sure, absolutely. This next statement was brought up by Chuy Varela up in the Bay Area at KCSM. When you refer to Latin jazz, you're really talking about a huge number of unique countries with their own distinct styles. And then he went on to elaborate beyond this, but I'll pose this question to you. What is unique about your specific style of Latin jazz? And if you were a DJ spinning this new album, how would you describe your music?
Well, I would like to say that my music is very personalized in a sense of I'm trying to channel my music through my own experiences, through my own way of living, to the way I see the world, and it's my own expression. I'm using, as many other musicians and every other musician, tools and things that might represent or might hint somehow what we call the so-called Latin jazz music or Latin jazz, but I'm trying to personalize that within the melodic realm, the harmonic, and definitely the rhythmic aspect of it. I mean, most of the time when you're talking about Latin jazz, many people travel in their mind to the past, but they don't realize that it has been evolved and it keeps being evolving. And we are now a younger generation who represents that style one way or another with a different view, with a different point of view, the way we actually live now. I think it would be insincere for me to try to replicate, any style that was, in a way, placed and created in the past, because I don't live that way. So I'm trying to actually be as much sincere to the time where I live, the way I live now, and that's the way I write my music. What the emotions that I have, the way I think about it, and the way I really organize the whole template of the music that I create.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I obviously the evolution of jazz, and as things continue to evolve, we're gonna not only change the style of the music, but we're gonna change how the nomenclature, how we refer to the music, the different type genres. The way it's taught, the way that we communicate this, person to person. Another question, this is a question from Chuy. I was directed towards Sammy Figueroa. Do you feel like there are more opportunities now for Latin jazz artists than there have been in the past? And is Latin jazz going through a transformation?
Latin jazz and every music is going to go through transformation. It's related to the answer that I gave you before.
Yeah.
We are not living the same times that people were living before. And many times people forget that genres and music styles and way of playing music is developed by the musicians. Musicians are just human beings, and they have different necessities, different ways of living, different way of thinking, different ways of actually expressing what they want to express. Therefore, it's going to always be different. It's always going to be evolving. If you're talking about all the way from what we call the time of DC and Chano Pozo, which it was, somehow a way to conceive the beginning of that we call Latin jazz now. That's a long way from now. We don't live the same way those guys lived, and socially and politically, and just the whole world is a completely different world. So how could you expect to have the same kind of music? That's the first thing. And the second thing, I just think that I wasn't born, and it's part of the same answer that I gave you already. I wasn't there. The only thing that I get from there are the stories, which many of them could be real, others could be very hypothetical. I don't know the difference. What I can tell you is that right now, me as a musician coming from Cuba, I have actually to do an enormous amount of work to keep myself active and to keep myself present in the industry. Starting from more than 10 years ago, I have created my own label because I didn't receive any interest from any label, even though we sent the recordings around to see which label was interested in the music, and none of them seemed to be interested. So I actually went ahead and did my own label, and now I do all the work basically behind my music, from creating the first note to the last note, to going into the recording studio, record, and then promote the music, the whole thing. Now, that's different from what it used to be. Musicians before, they just play the music, they get paid, and then the label did everything else, right? Mm-hmm. That's a different story, completely different. Now we have to really use an enormous amount of time for the extra work of not only the music, but to put yourself out there, to try to do the best publicity possible, so that people get to know your work and get that experience.
Yeah. Touching on what you were saying earlier about music evolving, personally, I see that we can, if we allow freedom, we allow people to do the things and evolve in a way that, musically as well as socially and politically and whatever, we open up the opportunities for that type of evolution. However, the inverse is also true. If we restrict people, we can restrict that type of evolution. Now, granted, seems like the music always finds a way. But one thing that Arturo was mentioned, or his statement, the literal statement was that Latin jazz wasn't born in Havana or San Juan. It was born in New York City. Do you agree with this statement?
And what difference does it make? That's my question behind. I mean, what difference does it make if you make beans in New York using the recipe from Cuba or from, jazz was not created in New York either. And not right now, jazz music, the real, core of a lot of innovative and a lot of things. I mean, many great musicians, they travel from New Orleans, Mississippi, and every places, Chicago, a lot of places in the U.S. to New York. So it happened in New York because it's a platform. It's a great city, a very cosmopolitan, that allows you to really integrate a lot of different genres and have that kind of evolution be really palpable within the music. But it's just that's just the way it is. That doesn't mean anything, in the long run.
And a little disclaimer, and I'd have to go back and look at exactly what the context of that statement was in. I believe it was in context of the embargo and the fact that it just became at a certain point very difficult for people in Cuba to interact with the people in the United States.
That is a reality.
So,
I mean, we have a reality in the world right now which is not necessarily positive. And the reality is that we have humans, we have allowed to rise politics above everything.
Yeah.
And I think that's the biggest damage that human beings have done to this world. I think we should put a lot of things prior to politics. And when you let politicians and people in the politics take care of the culture, that's where the problem comes. You know, people without culture taking care of the culture. That's not right. And taking care of a lot of things. So I don't think we have now the right order in the level of society to really point out in any positive outcome out of the same that we're doing. I mean, there is a lot to be fixed. We have really progress from before also, but at the same time there is a lot of work to be done in so many different places.
No, I agree. I quote. So getting into some of the more some of the more direct statements here. This was another statement that was directed towards Jose Rizzo out here at K-Jazz. A question that was asked him: is Latin music ignored in mainstream media? How do you feel about that?
I think so. I mean, mainstream media is basically chasing those, whatever genre is people consuming the most and boosting them. They're not really taking the responsibility as educating people. They're just taking advantage of the situation and moving on with it.
Yeah.
So it is very clear to me that, there is a lack of that responsibility in a way. And, many times people are, rumbling through the same, taste and to the same thing as they have been exposed. If you expose people to a certain kind of music for so long and every day and at all times, they're going to get used to it. I mean, it even happens to me when I hear many times certain kind of popular music, pop music. At the beginning, I'm like, oh, wow, that's, it sounds very... And then 2 months, 3 months after that, I hear it and I say, oh, all right, whatever. It's like you can get used to the greatest and you can also, unfortunately, get used to the worst. And that's why it's so fundamental, the educational and the real responsibility from the media, the mainstream, and every other radio station or publication or promotion that anyone does out there.
Well, to end this on a positive note, and of course, I think we should continue to be positive and look forward towards, to not just, music, obviously music, but, the current state of our affairs and all of that. The question that was directed towards Bobby Sanabria: what is the future of Latin jazz? And then a couple things here. Is it in Latin America or is it elsewhere?
I mean, hypothetical thoughts are always welcome to me because I like to imagine and I'm curious to also know about it. But it seems that specifically the place, I'm not sure. Because right now, the real, let's say, the culture has moved. Is center for a few times already. Before, in the Renaissance, used to be Italy. Then it came to be in France. Then it came now in New York. Who knows what is going to be next? But I'm more concerned about the music and the contents of the music. And to me, referring to that is reflected to the other questions that you ask. I just think that it is going to keep evolving, and nowadays where everything is so, you can get information so easily by just touching and pressing a button and see, okay, where is the music from India, where's the music, and get really inspiration from it or information from different kind of cultures in the world. That's definitely going to keep happening at some point. So I think from the musical point of view, it might be more of a mix of cultures than just one single culture by itself. And we have to really look at the evolution of all styles. We see it in classical music, from the Renaissance and into the more contemporary composers, and we see the same thing from the history of the blues going all the way to swing, bebop, and then everything that happened. It's just an evolution. It's inevitable. We humans evolve, hence music evolve. The music doesn't come out of trees. The music is made by human beings, and if you evolve that human beings, you're gonna evolve the music.
Well, and earlier you when you were discussing the album, you mentioned transparency and sort of the significance of that, of the title, and just transparency in music. One of Chewy's other questions was how is Latin jazz a reflection of our current society? But I guess my question to you would be, how is specifically this album a reflection of both your musicality, but what you are currently experiencing right now?
I just think that transparency is the way. If we had transparency from all these years before up to now, transparency in the way we communicate things in our own special and specific interests. We all have different interests. If we have the transparency to really be able to communicate that, to be able to share that one way or another, taking away all the hypocrisy and all the political interests that could be behind anything, then we would have saved a lot of aggravations at this moment and not keep fighting so much for things that just, it's just sometimes ridiculous stuff that happens now in a society like the U.S., for example. You consider the U.S. to be, a first world country, things that happen socially that not even in second or third world countries happen and are happening here. So I think transparency is a great way of keeping a sincere relationship to anything in music and in the relations between humans or anything. So that's why, to me, I consider it to be kind of a wish. I'm wishing that to be the world to be more transparent. It's an evocation to that. I want that to happen. So that's why this music it reflects all of that way of thinking and that approach, and that's the way I think we should go about.
That's a great statement. I'm really glad that we were able to kind of come full circle back to that and the idea of transparency and Latin jazz and the current state of affairs. So, well, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Dafnis. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. And new album coming out in October, Transparency, Dafnis Prieto Sextet. Wonderful to talk to you, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you very much, Ben. My pleasure. Thank you very much.